For today's sutta, we will be discussing another giant, perhaps one of the biggest giants that we may find in the middle-length discourses. Many people, when they hear the Majjhima Nikāya, the term of the middle-length discourses, they immediately think about Sammā Diṭṭhi Sutta. For many, it is a vast and deep and complex discourse. That tackles the first principle of the Eightfold Path, right view, Sammā Diṭṭhi. And who better, other than Lord Buddha himself, of course, but who better to be giving it other than the general of the Dhamma, the second in wisdom only to Lord Buddha himself, Venerable Sāriputta, the chief disciple. So here we see a discourse where Venerable Sāriputta compassionately is delineating, looking at it at the right view, but in the context of the Four Noble Truths. We see how multi-nuanced it is. Oftentimes people just brush off Sammā Diṭṭhi, yeah, right view. I'm studying the Buddha's teachings, so I'm already, doing the right thing. I'm already on the right path. I agree, yes. I've never come across anyone who disagreed with the Noble Eightfold Path once I've explained to them, or at least delineated, just pointed them out. You will never find anyone who says, well, I don't agree with that. Let's say right action. What is that? Who can say, no, I want to have the engagement of wrong action. I love wrong speech. No one in their right mind would say that. And similarly, when we come to the first principle, without which the whole formula is in shambles, is lost, and that is right view. It is not an intellectual view, we will see. There's something that's called mundane and something that's called supramundane, other than the superficial understanding of something. And here we're going to see Venerable Sāriputta explain the different categories of how one may understand. Again, like all of the discourses that we've discussed, at least, if not all of them, throughout the Nikāyas, they're geared towards having the listener, the reader, the practitioner, bring the Four Noble Truths into one's own life in a much more coherent manner, where it becomes personal. The Dhamma is very personal. The Dhamma is more personal than your career, than your income, than your reputation. We will also be introduced to the four right efforts, and we see how they will be used because of their functionality. Because they're the Samma Padhana, the four right strivings or right efforts, and which is part of the Noble Eightfold Path, yes, but they also have their own breakdown or framework in relation to unwholesome evil, bad, merit-making actions, bad karma basically, and then in relation to the right efforts that involve the bringing up of the opposite of those types of karma or actions, meaning the good merit-making actions, the wholesome, the skillful actions, willfully committed skillful actions. Because this Dhamma cannot be practiced unless we relinquish the bad karmas that we're engaging in. You will never be able to even come close to understanding the Dhamma, let alone attaining the wonderful states that we keep hearing about, read about in the suttas, if you continue on engaging in wrong actions. Your intellectual understanding of the Dhamma won't cut it. When you're right there in the middle of the crosshairs of an event and a set of conditions that enable you to choose between good or bad actions, and you choose the bad one, your whole intellectual career in studying, exploring, memorizing the Dhamma mean nothing. Because the moment of death, when it arrives, it will find you in poverty when it comes to good merit-making actions, kusala kamma, wholesome actions. And those wholesome actions come because of their purifying quality in establishing you in a place of tranquility, where there isn't that fighting and anxious or agitated state of mind. Why? Because you've spent a lifetime preparing your mind by choosing, by understanding as to why I am engaging in this path that is difficult versus the easy. To commit an action that is evil, to commit an action that is unskillful or unwholesome is so easy. To heal, it takes time. To harm, to hurt, it's so easy. It just takes a moment of careless attention or inattention. What does that mean it's lacking? It means that it's lacking Sammā Diṭṭhi. So Sammā Diṭṭhi is not something for some people some of the time. Sammā Diṭṭhi for all people, all the time, in all sets of conditions, because we're always making, whether we like it or not, some choices. In the way we allow the mind to hover or go and just like a kite that's been let loose, and the wind comes and blows it away. That's where the mind is usually, somewhere, weaving newer and newer scenarios of papanchas, newer scenarios of more and more unwholesome states. That's why fear comes, worries never leave, and new ideas and new desires that are led by the three kileshas, the defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion. That's what one's own actions are guided by. And because of these three, we have the 10 unwholesome actions committed by the mind, committed by the speech, 3 committed by the mind, 3 committed by the body, 4 committed by the tongue, by speech. Tongue could also be digital, the things that we send to someone in email, a comment, we text, we gesture. We don't have to be using actual words. Whether it's gossiping, lying, changing the truth to fit our own agendas, engaging in frivolous speech, backstabbing, type of conversation that breaks people apart, that love being together. So that's just one example of the 10 unwholesome actions that are based on the 3 defilements within the heart, the kilesas. Sometimes I say kilesa, sometimes people are confused, but earlier in my studies, the teachers that I've had were primarily Sri Lankan bhikkhus. And in Sri Lanka, whenever they study, they also are highly influenced by Sanskrit pronunciation of the Pali terms, which is very odd. So sometimes they would say kilesa, but with a Sanskrit influence. So that's something that's left over from that part of my past. But it's kilesa term. Anyhow, it's a long sutta, not very long, but still, I don't want to be rushing through it. But it's a deep sutta, so I highly recommend you pay close attention and do look at the PDF available. One day I'm hoping that once this is done, it might be printed, perhaps. People would have these suttas at least printed. Anyhow, again, this is from the Majjhima Nikāya, Middle Length Discourses, Sutta number MN9, Majjhima Nikāya number 9. And it comes from the first grouping of the Majjhima Nikāya, groupings of suttas or discourses, and it's the Mula Pariyaya Vagga. Mula Pariyaya is also, by the way, the name of the first sutta of the Majjhima Nikāya, which is truly a giant. In fact, it is the quintessential elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, because people don't know what to do with it. It's so complex, but it's so simple looking, simple sounding. So for that reason, many teachers just avoid having the students even read up on it or read it, become familiar with it. Instead, they would tell them more of the colorful suttas that come, after the Sabbasava Sutta, etc. But anyhow, that is also one of the suttas I would like to cover with you one of these days, if and when I get to translate that fully. So it's from that section, which is the earliest part of the sections of the Majjhima Nikāya. It is called Sammā Diṭṭhi Sutta, Discourse on Right View. Let's begin. I have personally heard this. During the time when the Blessed One was staying at the monastery offered by Anathapindika in Jeta's Park, in the city of Savatthi, the Venerable Sāriputta addressed his fellow bhikkhus and said, "Friends, bhikkhus." "Yes, friend," those bhikkhus replied. And the Venerable Sāriputta continued, "Friends, the term right view is often mentioned. But what does it mean when a noble disciple is said to possess right view? The one whose view is unmistakably accurate. Someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma. The one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. Indeed, friend, we would come from far and wide to learn the meaning of this statement from the Venerable Sāriputta. Now, it would be wonderful if the Venerable Sāriputta clarified the meaning of these questions. On hearing it from the Venerable Sāriputta, the bhikkhus will thus learn and carry it in their hearts. In that case, friends," this is Venerable Sāriputta responding, "listen carefully. Please listen carefully as you apply your mind's attention properly to what I will share with you here." "Yes, friend," the bhikkhus responded, and the Venerable Sāriputta continued by saying, usually, if you noticed, a few of the suttas that we've covered where Venerable Sāriputta is the main protagonist, as it were, the expositor, the one who's explaining the Dhamma. Usually you have a Q&A situation. Here, Venerable Sāriputta is the one who instigated it, who's starting this. who's asking the question and placing it in front of the bhikkhus, his fellow bhikkhus, so that he offers them the explanation. So usually you would have another person, another bhikkhu, namely another arahant, by the way, Venerable Mahakotita, if you remember. He was also very, very wise. So he would strategically position questions so that he would gather his own students, he would bring them over with him to visit Venerable Sāriputta, and he would ask these questions as if he were not an arahant. And some people might think that he was not an arahant, but actually he was. But he was asking those specific questions for the sake of his students and anyone present there who was not yet an arahant, because of the value of the intricacy of the explanations, the especially beautiful explanation that Venerable Sāriputta was known to provide to questions like this. So here we don't have that, although in some of the other versions in the I think in the Agamas you have this sutta, but it's actually being instigated. The question is coming from Venerable, I think, Venerable Mahakotita. Anyhow, they're both in that sutta. But I go back to the Pali. It's more valid for me, more verifiable, more authentic, I could say. But that's my opinion, of course. Anyhow, let's move forward. Distinguishing what is unskillful from the skillful. This is the heading that I chose for this, and let's go. Whenever, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that are unskillful, he does so carefully. That it means whenever somebody's looking at a phenomenon that is akusala. Kusala means wholesome or skillful. Akusala means unskillful, unwholesome, bad. So he does so carefully while observing, looking at things, as he comes to also see the very root of the unskillful, seeing their connection clearly. So it's not just the superficial appearance of this being unskillful. That's not enough. A noble disciple has to go a little bit beneath it, go deeper than what meets the eye. You need to look for the very root of the unskillful. Similarly, while looking at things that are skillful, he does so carefully as he comes to also see the very root of the skillful, seeing their connection clearly. In this manner, he would be declared a noble disciple who is said to possess right view, the one whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. That is one of the reasons why no noble disciple accepts or knows the true Dhamma simply because Lord Buddha said it. That's a fact. Venerable Sāriputta was known for that. When he was questioned by a very famous Brahmin, and Venerable Sāriputta said, the question was basically, you accept it because he's your teacher, right? And Venerable Sāriputta said, no, I know this to be true by myself, by my own examination, investigation. I know this to be true. It's totally separate from Lord Buddha having said it. I don't believe it because he said so. Which religious practice has that within it? Teaches that? Well, this one does. Personally verifiable. Now, friends, what is meant by unskillful, and what are the very roots of the unskillful? Similarly, what is meant here by skillful, and what are the very roots of the skillful, which the noble disciple is looking at? Killing living beings, friends, is unskillful. Stealing and taking things that are not given to oneself is unskillful. Engaging in sexual misconduct is unskillful. Speaking falsehood is unskillful. Gossiping and using malicious speech is unskillful. Using harsh and destructive speech is unskillful. Engaging in idle and frivolous chatter is unskillful. Living with and having covetousness and longing in the heart is unskillful. Having anger and ill will is unskillful. Possessing wrong view in one's heart is unskillful. The last one is especially important. All of them are important, obviously, because this was actually the 10 unwholesome or unskillful kammas, actions, akusala kammas. But here, the last one that Venerable Sāriputta pointed out, possessing wrong view in one's heart is truly unskillful. Wrong view, contrast that with right view. Sometimes people say, well, what is right view? Well, understanding the Noble Eightfold Path. That's a good start. Right view is not just saying, oh, I bow down to Lord Buddha, yes, I'm a Buddhist, or I respect Buddha, I have his quotes, something like that. But that means nothing when your life is being led by wrong view, as demonstrated by the lack in right speech. It's not there. There is wrong speech, there is wrong action, there is wrong effort. There's wrong mindfulness, there is wrong meditation. There's wrong livelihood. Why? Because right view is not there. If right view is missing, the whole thing is falling apart. It's impossible for it to turn into right effort when the right view is missing. So they come together. All these, friends, are called unskillful. And what, friends, is meant by the very root of the unskillful? Having greed in the heart is the root of the unskillful. Having hatred in the heart is the very root of the unskillful. Having delusion in the heart is the very root of the unskillful. These three combined, therefore, are called the very roots of the unskillful. These are the kilesas I mentioned: lobha, dosa, moha. Greed, hatred, or avarice, delusion. These three are at the root. They are the roots, sometimes called also the poisons, the three poisons you've heard me say before. And what, friends, is meant by skillful, and what are the very roots of the skillful? Abstaining from killing living beings, friends, is skillful. Abstaining from stealing or taking things that are not given to oneself is skillful. Abstaining from engaging in sexual misconduct is skillful. Abstaining from speaking falsehood is skillful. Abstaining from gossiping and the use of malicious speech is skillful. Abstaining from using harsh and destructive speech is skillful. Abstaining from engaging in idle and frivolous chatter is skillful. Not living with nor having covetousness or longing in the heart is skillful. Not having anger or ill will is skillful. Possessing right view in one's heart is skillful. All these, friends, are called skillful. And what, friends, is meant by the very root of the skillful? Having non-greed in the heart is the very root of the skillful. Having non-hatred in the heart is the very root of the skillful. Having non-delusion in the heart is the very root of the skillful. In Pali, you just add the prefix a, and that is the alobha, adosa, amoha. These three combined, therefore, are called the very roots of the skillful. And when, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that are unskillful, he does so carefully. He comes to also see the very root of the unskillful, seeing their connection clearly. Similarly, while looking at things that are skillful, he does so carefully, as he comes to also see the very root of the skillful, seeing their connection clearly. Then he abandons and lets go of the underlying drive for passion or lust. He removes the underlying drive for having dislike or resistance. In Pali, it's patigha, resistance. And he completely uproots from his heart the underlying drive for bearing the conceit I am or am, mana. These basically bring about the defilements, in a sense. The anusayas, the underlying tendencies, anusayas. So when a person is looking at things that are unskillful and carefully observing to see what their roots are or what its root is, that is a person who's not going to be so apologetic or forgiving of having or maintaining bad habits. What Venerable Sāriputta is referring here to is a person who is not on automatic pilot. This is why we practice our observational skills, namely through sati and sampajanya, mindfulness and full awareness of where we are, what we're doing, how we're processing, what we are thinking, where we are coming from with this sentence that I'm about to say. The compelling force behind me wanting to reach over and do this. Where am I coming from? This requires you to freeze everything for a moment and look at the nature of the action that is about to be committed, meaning you're looking at the intentionality of it. Where is this coming from? You're looking at the root. This is not a person who is absent-minded. This is not a person who's functioning by habit, which is what majority of the planet does. Majority of beings do, in fact. Because you are not impulsively doing things anymore. Thus, by leaving behind ignorance and gaining true knowledge within himself, he puts an end to suffering here within this very life of his. Ignorance is left, true knowledge is gained. This is something you're going to see and hear. Ignorance and knowledge cannot coexist. The whole diversity sham that's going on in the world doesn't function here. Ignorance and knowledge, true knowledge, cannot coexist. Wisdom and being dumb don't go together. Kusala and akusala will never work together. There's no inclusionary tactics there. One of them has to go say bye-bye. If you want to become an arahant, if you want to see, then you need to stop doing stupid things, stupid choices. Bad habits have to be dropped. Ignorance has to be let go of, has to be killed, eliminated, destroyed. It is in this manner, friends, that a noble disciple is said to possess right view, the one whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. In listening to these words spoken by the Venerable Sāriputta, the fellow bhikkhus became quite delighted as they exclaimed, "Sadhu, friend." Sadhu means I agree with that, wonderful, may it be so. You're showing, that you concur, obviously, and that you're also delighted by what you heard. Next section, understanding the role of nourishment. Now, Venerable Sāriputta is going to be talking about the aharas. Ahara are the nourishments, or sometimes in English translated as nutriments, And we're going to see Venerable Sāriputta apply right view. So looking at the nutriments, the four nutriments, through the prism or through the lens of right view. Then the bhikkhus proceeded to ask the Venerable Sāriputta a further question, as they said, "But friend, could there be another way of describing a noble disciple, other than one who possesses right view, whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma?" Yes, friends, there could be another way of describing a noble disciple. Whenever, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that nourish, he does so carefully, as he comes to see and understand the very role of nourishment. That is, he understands the nourishment itself, the origin or arising of that which nourishes, the ending and cessation of the nourishment, and the path that leads to the cessation of the nourishment. Do you see a pattern here? Do you see the underlying formula? He just used the Four Noble Truths, like he did earlier. You have to be able to apply the Four Noble Truths into every single aspect of your life. If you have a headache, ask yourself, what is this? Is it delightful or is it painful? It's painful. Okay. Is it suffering, or what is painful? Is it suffering, or it's heavenly, pleasing? No, it's suffering. Okay. Where does suffering come from? Where does dukkha come from? Well, from holding on tightly to something, craving something. Yes, you could say it's from ignorance. Yeah, but your ignorance of the fact that you're clinging onto something, grabbing onto something so tightly. Well, what could that be at that moment? You can ask. What you're doing is you're applying the second noble truth. You're looking for samudaya, point of origin. Why am I hurting so much? Sometimes it's biological, sometimes because you're holding on to something else, like getting rid of the pain, or having this meeting go faster, or getting the results that you want, and you're running impatient. The moment you see that's taking place, suddenly something else happens, and there's a release of that. There's an ending, even momentarily, of that suffering. You just are tasting the third noble truth. You see how it's working. The Four Noble Truths have to be applied in every nook and cranny of your life to bring happiness and peace and tranquility and sanity and wisdom into your life. You don't use it, that means there's no right view in your life. That means you're not practicing the teachings of Lord Buddha, period. That's it. But let's see what Venerable Sāriputta says about nourishment. In this manner, he would be declared a noble disciple who is said to possess right view, the one whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. Now, friends, what is meant by nourishment? This is important because some people don't know what it is. What is ahara? What is the origin and arising of that which nourishes? What is the ending and cessation of the nourishment? And what is the path that leads to the cessation of the nourishment? Again, the Four Noble Truths we just saw. Samudaya. Before that, dukkha, the truth of the satya of dukkha, the satya of origination, satya of nirodha. Satya meaning the truth, arya satya. And then arya satya, noble truth of the magga, the path. But he is using the nourishment principle here, a very important part of the teachings. There are, friends, these four kinds of nourishment that are necessary to sustain living beings who have already taken birth, as well as to give support to those beings who are yet to be reborn and are thus still seeking a new form of becoming in various realms. That doesn't mean that they're in a state of limbo somewhere, between lives. There's no such thing in the teachings of Lord Buddha. You do have that later on in the Tibetan tradition, like the Bardo Todol and other things, which are not Buddhist. at all. But we don't have that. So in between lives, that's what this is in reference to. Somebody who's about to die, and they haven't, it might be a few milliseconds. Or those who have already been born. They need nourishment. A baby that's just been born, a puppy that's just been born, they need certain nourishments, right? But not just those. All the way until the end of one's life, you need nourishments. Some more than others. And what are these four nourishments, friends? First is the nourishment of edible food that is consumed, whether solid or liquid, coarse or refined. Secondly, the nourishment of contact. Thirdly, the nourishment of intentional thinking. And fourthly, the nourishment of consciousness or sense awareness. Everyone understands the first part, the edible food. When you're injured or you've been operated upon in the hospital, or you're running low on energy or nutriments or nourishment, they will set you up with an IV, right? In vitro, they will take an IV bag and hook you up so that you will get that plasma coming in or sugar water. Everyone understands that. But the second one, phassa, contact, how is that a nutriment? How is that? When you hear a sound, but you don't see the source of it, and you're standing by the window, and it came through the window, the sound, or you can tell, what do you immediately want to do? Turn over and see. That's a very simple example of contact. We want to touch things, whether it's through the tactile perception, through the body, through the eyes, ears, hearing, listening, nose, of course, tongue, the body, but especially the mind. We love ideas. That is why it's such a difficult thing to get rid of perceptions, as we saw in the Putta Sutta. How the noble disciple who's really in training, wanting to go to the higher and higher and higher states of consciousness, in a sense, or perception, and to be free from that, is something that you find in this Dhamma and discipline, where you have an advanced meditator to even get sick of having perceptions, intentions, abhisankaroti, cetana, and just to be relinquished and be done, at least in those states of cessation. That means the person does not want to have anything to do with these contacts, well, especially the one that's coming next, mano sancetana, intentional thinking, which is the third ahara. This is very subtle to detect, but every one of us experiences this. Every living being is experiencing these. Now, it's only a matter of how much effort is being applied in effort here, specifically in relation to yoniso manasikara, wise reflective attention, wise reflection, basically, to put your attention to the tiniest little movements, especially one very good way of discovering or noticing mano sancetana as a nutriment, as a nourishment, as an ahara in your living experience is when there is far less noise than usual in your mind, less distractions in your life. One I think a very wonderful suggestion here would be to those moments, those gaps between your sleep, when you're waking up, something happened and you have to readjust your bed, your pillow, yourself, or you have to get up momentarily, observing the very first thought vibrations that happen, or emotional needs, something that compels you to move. Looking at that, probing that very carefully, you will come to actually make contact with mano sancetana, which are very much related to sankharas, by the way, which are also very difficult to detect. But the more you do this, the more you see them. These are not things that are in books or in a supermarket you go and just get a pack of. No, these are experiential realities to be experienced by you, basically. And the fourth one is a more intelligible nourishment, one could say, and that is the consciousness, specifically the six consciousnesses. And they're very much related. So sometimes you could say that contact, mano sancetana, and vijnana, this one, the fourth one, are aspects of the same phenomenon. Aspects. When you smell a delicious food, are you happy with just the smell? Something in you says, oh, I wonder how it tastes like. Already your tongue is starting to, you're starting to salivate. When you even think about food, digestion has begun. The stomach is getting ready. The chemistry inside the stomach is changing, preparing. Enzymes are being prepared on your tongue, around your lips, inside your esophagus. Why? Because you're detecting. So there's all kinds of, and contact hasn't technically happened yet. But vijnana is happening. Why? The mind is working, because the mind is the go-between in all of the other five senses, the five vijnanas. It rules over all. It's like, if you've ever followed Lord of the Rings, the one ring that brings them all, the one ring that controls them all or destroys them all, that's it, the mind. Mano vijnana. Because you take that off commission, the mind consciousness, everything else is going to be offline, as they say. So, these are the four types of nourishment that are necessary to sustain living beings who have already taken birth, as well as to give support to those beings who are yet to be reborn and are thus still seeking a new form of becoming in various realms. It is with the arising and presence of craving that there is the arising of nourishment. Aha! So now we are being introduced to craving, tanha, that constant thirst. Wanting, that's never satiated. That's why you want to look over. And even if that noise happened a few times already and you looked and you saw the source of it, it happens again, guess what? The head wants to turn because the mind says, yeah, I'm curious, let's find out. What is it being led by? Craving. Craving, if it is present, it means something else is not present. Or at the very least, restraint is not present. Because you're allowing craving to take the reins and just lead you anywhere it wants. How's that going to bring wisdom into the scene, into your mind, into your heart? There's no yoniso manasikara because there's no sati. When craving rules, you cannot say, well, I'm aware of my craving, Bhante. I know I'm very much mindful of my lusts. What? Yes, you have many, 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 many Buddhists who do that. We see here that's not the case. However, with the ending of craving, there is the ending and cessation of nourishment. Now we are looking at the third, right? Cessation, whenever you hear cessation or nirodha, that is a reference also to the third noble truths, right? But whenever you see cessation, you're also going to be what? What's coming next in the next corner? Magga, the fourth noble truth, which has to explain to you what are the means by which cessation takes place. It's not happening mystically by some magical power somewhere, by some divine being. None of that. It requires work. It requires us to apply the Noble Eightfold Path. That's what's coming. Meanwhile, the path that leads to the cessation of nourishment is none other than the application and practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. That is, right view, right intentional thought, right intentional thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, right samadhi. And when, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that nourish, he does so carefully as he comes to see and understand the very role of nourishment. That is, he understands the nourishment itself, the origin of that which nourishes, the ending and cessation of the nourishment, and the path that leads to the cessation of nourishment. Earlier, I gave you that suggestion of one example of let's say, when the mind is quieter and you wake up, let's say, in the middle of the night, and you're observing, and you've gotten your sati to such a level that you're able to detect the finest nuances, or finer nuances. Let's say you can't, for some reason, and you're instead creating agitation, because too much virya is going to create agitation. Why? Because now you just added samudaya of craving, second noble truth. Because it's not happening, folks. I have to get this. I want to know this nutriment that Bhante talked about. How come it's not happening? You're just creating what? Dukkha, first noble truth. So immediately drop your quest for experiencing the nutriment of Mano Sanchetana, let's say, and look at what you're doing and what it's creating. You're creating friction, heat, pain. That's the point of origin. And then what do? You're applying, as you see this, all of a sudden it lets go. There's a release, there's a cessation, and now you have a clearing. Now you can approach it fresh. And you are applying right mindfulness, Noble Eightfold Path. So fourth noble truth does not mean you have to always be applying the Noble Eightfold Path, all 8 of them, given the situation. Some might argue, yes, you are doing it. Okay, fine, but they will be in different gradations. There will be a predominance of one, given the context, given the situation, given the need at that juncture. And when, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that nourish, he does so carefully as he comes to see and understand the very role of nourishment. That is, he understands the nourishment itself, the origin and arising of that which nourishes, the ending and cessation of the nourishment, and the path that leads to the cessation of the nourishment. That's 4 noble truths. Then he abandons and lets go of the underlying drive for passion or lust. This is key. That's why we're practicing. That's why what we're doing all this work for. The underlying tendencies have to be, you need to use the shovel of wisdom to eradicate, pluck them out, these anusayas. Like we saw in the Bhante Sutta some years ago, the anthill, simile of the anthill. Dig, it says, dig, use the sword, use the knife, probe, dig. What is the knife? Wisdom. Dig through the anthill. You're going to see a lot of things come up, and now we are digging and we see passion or lust, raga, he removes the underlying drive for having dislike or resistance, patigha, and he completely uproots from his heart the underlying drive for bearing the conceit, I am, asmimana. That conceit is and has been and is going to continue to be the death and destruction of many a meditator in this path, on this path. Conceit. So many people will leave this body despite the fact that they have come to the Dhamma. Why? Because the hold that conceit has on the heart is so tremendous. Their trust and faith in the asmimana is far greater than the trust and faith and confidence in the Dhamma. Dhamma is not something out there that's faceless, this and that. And yeah, I worship the Dhamma, or I pay refuge, I take refuge in the Dhamma, I pay respect to the Dhamma. It's not like that. When push comes to shove and you are living through a difficult moment in your life, decisions have to be made. Are you choosing kusala or akusala? Are you choosing the Dhamma or adhamma? When you are not choosing what is Dhamma, you are choosing asmimana, meaning you are choosing adhamma. Now that can take any kind of coloration you want. But basically, whatever comes natural, that's another thing that people use. Habitually, that's what you're used to. Well, habitually, you're used to the kilesas, period. Not wisdom. That's not your habit. Wisdom is not, it doesn't come naturally. You have to work to get wisdom. Ignorance works naturally. Conceit works naturally. Mara works naturally. Underline, quotation marks, naturally. Why? Because they're easy. They're easy. When you're sitting to meditate, what is more difficult to do? To sit or to get up any moment? You have a tiny little scratch, an itch, a pain, a tiny little something. Oh, there's a sound. Oh, it's coming from the kitchen. What is that? Oh, maybe that's a mouth. Let me get up. It's the first thing that gets to be sacrificed. You're sit. You're calm. You're tranquil. That's the first thing that is thrown out into the traffic. Out the window. It is harder, however, to sit through that. Why? Because you're going against Mara, you're going against conceit. That's why many people cannot become students these days. True students of the Dhamma require us to be humble. How many humble people do you know? Those are, if you find them, those are the ones who have the necessary requisite to be a student of the Dhamma. But we are ensuring that we never get to that moment of or place of humility. So we are locking ourselves out of being true students of the Dhamma. So we add more and more nonsense. Data, nonsense data about the Dhamma. And continue to fester in the cesspit of our ignorance. And there goes another life. Next one, you're going to probably be, if you're lucky, a four-legged animal somewhere. If you're lucky. Thus, by leaving behind ignorance and gaining true knowledge within himself, he puts an end to suffering here, within this very life of his. It is in this manner, friends, that a noble disciple is said to possess right view, the one whose view is unmistakably accurate. Someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. In listening to these words spoken by the Venerable Sāriputta, the fellow bhikkhus became quite delighted as they exclaimed, "Sadhu, friend." Now we get to the Four Noble Truths directly. So this section is headed by, the heading is Understanding the Four Noble Truths. Excuse me. Then the bhikkhus proceeded to ask the Venerable Sāriputta a further question and said, so they're taking the opportunity to keep asking, yeah, but Bhante, what about, not Bhante, because in those days, because Lord Buddha was still alive, bhikkhus would address each other as avuso, even if the other bhikkhu was 40 years their senior in vasas, they would call each other avuso, means, friend. But on his deathbed, Lord Buddha told them to avoid any complications with most people because people would be offended. And he even thought about that. He said, okay, whoever is senior to someone, even by an hour of vassa, like ordination and upasampada, then they need to call that person who's their senior Bhante. While the other one, if he chooses to call the other one who's less in seniority Bhante, that's up to them. But otherwise, they would call them avuso. So sometimes in the suttas you will see Bhante, maybe here and there, but generally it's avuso. Otherwise, Bhante would always go in reference to Lord Buddha or Bhagavan. Anyhow, understanding the Four Noble Truths. Then the bhikkhus proceeded to ask the Venerable Sāriputta a further question and said, but friend, could there be another way of describing a noble disciple other than one who possesses right view, whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma? Yes, friends, there could be another way of describing a noble disciple. So it's not just having right view, there's different requirements, different ways of identifying a person having right view. And that's why Venerable Sāriputta is going into each of these compartments of the Dhamma and pulling out these important frameworks of each. And now we're going to go to the one of the biggest, the Four Noble Truths, and indicate why having that understanding is considered right view as well. Whenever, friends, a noble disciple looks at suffering, he does so carefully as he comes to see and understand it, just like he said in the first paragraph with unskillful behaviors. He said he looks at the unskillful act or behavior as he comes to see and understand it. These two terms are very important. Seeing and understanding. Sometimes it's called Vijja and Vimutti. Sometimes they're called Jnana Dassana. To be able to see and understand what it means to be liberated, released, that requires a depth of comprehension that is direct to you, personal. So it is not like an aha moment only. Somebody giving you something. It is very personal. No one can tell you it. Similarly, he looks at the origin and cause of suffering, which he does carefully, as he comes to see and understand it. Similarly, he looks at the cessation and ending of suffering, which he does so carefully, as he comes to see and understand it. And he looks at the path that leads to the cessation and very ending of suffering, which he does carefully, as he comes to see and understand it. If you notice, these things are not done in a rush manner, which is what today's society is described as. Everyone is in a rush. We're speeding. Even if we're standing still, we are speeding. And by that same token, we want to, because we have this, and where does the speed come in, or come from? What is the root of that desire to keep speeding away, rushing? It comes from tanha, craving, which has ignorance as its own parent. Because ignorance comes in, or willfully ignoring the fact that, what am I doing? Why am I rushing? So long as we are rushing, that's what I'm trying to say. So long as we are pushing and shoving and rushing our way through understanding of Dhamma, we will not come to understand the Dhamma. We will not understand the Four Noble Truths. We will never appreciate dukkha. Somebody who doesn't appreciate and look carefully at dukkha will never, categorically stated, will never come to understand and appreciate samudaya. Will never understand, therefore, and appreciate nirodha. Will not even come close to even seeing, let alone practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the fourth Noble Truth, the Magga. So you need to really look at dukkha, your dukkha. You need to acknowledge, instead of rushing away, you need to acknowledge it. But what we're doing is we are rushing, we're in a hurry. That's why you go on retreats and you see everybody's rushing to attain to the first jhana or second or fourth, or actually attain nibbana. It's become like a diploma. So many people today go on retreats wanting to attain liberation just like that. Why? Because they're on a tight schedule. Come on. As if Nibbana is supposed to happen on a retreat. That's how it's listed. I mean, that's how it works, right? The Dhamma works like that, right? Well, hold on, excuse me, what happened to your life? The majority part of your life, your existence. That's the university. That's where you're actually getting the opportunity for an education of the Dhamma. But in order for you to really understand, or even come close to understanding dukkha, you need to give it the time of day. And that is called sati. Sati. Look at the neutral things more so than you're eager to look at the highly pronounced, loud experiences of pain or joy. Well, what happened in the between? Majority of it was neutral experiences, bland, but not that colorful. You mean to say life was not happening there? Yeah. That's why many people actually want to stay with passion. That's why anybody who pushes for, oh, I'm a very passionate person, Bhante. I love passion. Okay, stay in dukkha, my friend. Stay there. Skulk in the realm of Mara. That's stupid. That's a person who's ignorant, wanting to attain Nibbana at the same time. They don't work. Try to light turn on the light switch while telling the darkness in the room to not leave. See if you can convince the darkness to not leave. As you turn on the light switch, which has a light bulb that works and there's power coming in. It won't work. Similarly with the Dhamma. So we need to be able to slow things down. Not doing a retreat necessarily, but from you getting up in the, at the kitchen table, getting up, well, a lot happened before you even touch the table, so you can push yourself back with your chair, let's say, to get up, to rise up. Did you notice your hands touching the table? Which part of the hands? And when you're pushing, Or are your legs or one particular leg pushing more than the other? Is there sound being, produced because of those actions? And let's hold on a second. What instigated this? Mano sancetana. It was triggered. There was a desire. There was a need. There was a nutriment, nourishment. That's why we love Mano sancetana. We love making or having intentions. We love thinking. That's why it's very boring when you somehow end up in upekkha. The habitual part of the brain comes in and says, what are we doing next? We have to do something. What is this? Oh, let me have this. Boom, all of a sudden, boop, 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 and all of a sudden the hindrance shows up of restlessness. Uddhacca shows up. But it doesn't show up like in Niagara. It starts slowly, boom, 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 because you're leaking. You're not strong enough to withstand and push and close that door on them. Because you don't understand nutriment, how subtle it is. Because deep down, if you go, there is craving behind the Mano Sancetana, just like there's craving behind wanting to make contact, whether it's contact to an object of the mind, concept, memory, thought, idea, some principle, or relationships, even Dhammic relationships, but it's keeping the mind active. Digging deep and you will find the anusaya. Ooh, I like this thought. This is my thought. Thank you very much. What? Asmimana much? Conceit am is there, lurking about. Well, how are you going to know this if you're rushing? You can't. That's why we need to seclude ourselves. That's why we need to isolate ourselves, even if it's a small portion of the day. Isolate yourself from your technology around you. Or carry sati, that is your mobile seclusion cell. Wherever you go, sati, if you bring sati there, that is your kuti that you're carrying with you. No one can see it. That's the fun part. You can be in the middle of a very busy building with people typing away on their computers, sending emails, this and that, noise, this and that. If you have sati, you are in full lockdown. Nothing is coming in, the hindrances. And there's only one thing that can arise, and there is wisdom and understanding, seeing, vidya, knowing. In this manner, too, friends, he would be declared a noble disciple, one who is said to possess the right view, whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. Excuse me. Now, friends, what is meant by suffering? What is the origin and arising of suffering? What is the ending and cessation of suffering? And what is the path that leads to the cessation and very ending of suffering? Rebirth is suffering. Getting sick is suffering. Aging and getting old is suffering. Death is suffering. Grief, lamentation, pain, depression, and a sense of loss or anguish are all suffering. Associating with whatever is disagreeable or disliked is suffering. Separating from what one likes is suffering. Not getting what one likes is also suffering. In other words, all that the five grabbing aggregates try to latch onto is suffering. Five aggregates. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. Material form, feeling, perceptions, memories, habitual tendencies or drives, sankharas, and consciousness or sense awareness. We latch on to them. Why? Because it gives us some existential coherence, to feel that we exist. A part of us exists. Here's an experiment you can try. Imagine everyone you know in your life turns their back on you. Everyone. That means you take your phone and all the contacts in the contact section, everyone you know, I mean really know, suddenly don't want to talk to you. They cut their contact with you. And you go outside, and you so happens to be, basically, you happen to be in a place where you don't know anyone. You just landed in a foreign country. You don't know anyone. Or you lost your phone and there's no access to any technology. So there goes that. How will be your life after that moment? Because we like to continue, and that continuation occurs because of our desire to grab onto these five aggregates. That gives us meaning. That's why when rupa fails, the body is aching and it's falling apart, the legs don't work, this and that, you're on a wheelchair, you're not even identifiable, maybe you're a burn victim, or you lost your memory. But okay, form is out the door, what's left? Well, feeling is there. I can still feel pleasure, pain, neutral. We don't like that. Pleasure and pain. What about perception? Yeah, I have memories. Okay, so I can latch on to that. Ask any elderly person, senior citizen, any old person. You'll see sankharas. You'll see vijnana still. Anything, it's like driftwood that we're holding on to in the middle of the ocean. It's a shipwreck, you know. All this is called suffering, friends. And what is the origin and arising of suffering? Because Venerable Sāriputta is still explaining the Four Noble Truths. By the way, we'll end at the end of this section. We'll resume next week after that. And what is the origin and arising of suffering? It is this ongoing thirst that leads to repeated rebirth. While one seeks constant excitement and enjoyment, finding delight here and there, that is to say, being constantly thirsty for sensual pleasures, constantly thirsty for re-becoming, and constantly thirsty for non-becoming. Excuse me. These are the different forms of craving, by the way. This then is called the origin and arising of suffering, friends. And what about the ending and cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading away and dispassion, cessation, the giving up, the relinquishment, the release and abandoning of that very constant thirst for sensual pleasures, the constant thirst for re-becoming and the constant thirst for non-becoming. This is called the ending and cessation of suffering, friends. So even if you want to have, lights out at the end of a difficult life, I want out. I just don't want to exist anymore. There's nothing noble about it. You're just a nihilist. It's just as bad as somebody wanting to be reborn in the middle of a heavenly harem, right? In the Talatingsa heaven, like we saw some weeks ago. Sakka had built himself a huge mansion with plenty of prostitutes, basically. Divine. What a miserable life. What a terrible, terrible waste of life. Why? Because you're still craving. There's still suffering, albeit the possibility for pain is far less over there, but it's a ticking time bomb. Sooner or later, it might be billions of years, by the way. Sooner or later, it will run out. And you're going to fall on your behind, as they say, into the middle of Terrible situations, terrible birth. And it's going to be like a dream, even though it might have been many, many hundreds of millions of years. Too late, too bad, you're not in it. Time's up, gotta go. I might be oversimplifying here or presenting it in a very grotesque manner, but basically that's what it is. We've gone through the heavenly realm so many times we can't even keep track of, if you have the memory. Sometimes I tell students, I wish it would be possible for everyone to see their past lives. It would make it so much easier for everybody. The terror that you would recall from your time in the hell realms. And then the terror that occurred in your heart when you realized as a deva that you're about to fall from that glorious state of a divine being and end up in, I don't know, in the boondocks of Calcutta without food, in a family of 16 kids, and you're being pushed outside by your parents, no school, so that you can go and earn a living. Wait a minute, I was sitting by Sutka over there. What happened? I was enjoying all kinds of sexual pleasures. What is this? What is this body? It smells. What is? Yes. No wonder we can't remember, because it's full of disappointments. But if we could, it would make it so much easier for us to quickly wake up and put the effort to get ourselves off the hook of Mara, of death. Because there's no salvation, there's no freedom by seeking a rebirth in a heavenly realm, even the Brahma realms. We saw a few weeks ago, right, with Baka, the Brahma god, how he was drenched in ignorance. He was being fooled by Mara. I mean, how pathetic is that? You work doing good deeds for countless eons and you end up as a Brahma god only to be fooled by Mara? Are you kidding me? Well, you be a slave to your senses, that's what you will be. Even though you're working under the guise of basically doing kusala kamma, good, wholesome, merit-making actions. That's why Lord Buddha always discouraged his bhikkhus, his students, to merely seek a heavenly birth, or at any point. Lord Busada talks about this a lot. He's like, leave all that nonsense behind. Attain freedom. Stick to one object of meditation. Understand anicca, dukkha, anatta. Practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Understand dukkha and cut yourself free from this whole mass of suffering that exists in all of the 31 realms of existence. It's a nightmare to be desiring or ending up in a heavenly realm. It's a nightmare when you think of it in Dhammic terms. A noble disciple will never seek truly a life in a heavenly realm over cutting free totally, because for them the hell realm or the heavenly realms basically are not so different. Why? Because their understanding is far deeper. And what about the ending and cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading away and dispassion, cessation and the giving up and the relinquishment, the release, and I think I read that. This is called the ending and cessation of suffering, friends. And what is the path that leads to the cessation and the very ending of suffering? It is none other than the application and practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. That is, right view, right intentional thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And when, friends, a noble disciple looks at suffering, he does so carefully, as he comes to see and understand it. Similarly, he looks at the origin and cause of suffering, which he does carefully, as he comes to see and understand it. Similarly, he looks at the cessation and ending of suffering, which he does carefully, as he comes to see and understand it. And he looks at the path that leads to the cessation and the very ending of suffering, which he does carefully, as he comes to see and understand it. Then he abandons and lets go of the underlying drive for passion or lust. He removes the underlying drive. Underlying drive, again, here is a reference for anusayas. Latent tendencies, sometimes translated also. Anusaya, for having dislike or resistance, and he completely uproots from his heart the underlying drive for bearing the conceit, I am. Thus, by leaving behind ignorance and gaining true knowledge within himself, he puts an end to suffering here within this very life of his. Again, gaining true knowledge within himself means no one has given that to you, and no one can take that away from you. Lord Buddha could not, even if he wanted to, could not take anyone's realization away from them. Why? Because he never gave it to them in the first place. The person understands, realizes this. Anyone who thinks that their teacher is the one who gives them attainments, and that's why they huddle around such a teacher, despite the abuse and this and that, or despite the fact that they see that there's no Dhamma there. Many people latch on, just like Pancha Upadana Khanda. This time they added another 6th aggregate, and that is the teacher. Like, please don't leave us, don't let, yeah. Why? Why? I've looked at their eyes and I'm looking, as what is the driving force? And I see greed and craving. Why? Because they think, because the teacher said, oh, you're an anagami, oh, you're an arahant, oh, you're a sakadagama, you're sotapanna. If I disagree with the teacher, what does that do to my attainment? This might sound funny, but there are thousands of people like that. Thousands. I know hundreds of them personally. Terrible. That's why we're doing this, so that they could actually hear Lord Buddha's words, Venerable Sāriputta's words. They could wake up and not waste another life living like idiots. Thus, by leaving behind ignorance and gaining true knowledge within himself, he puts an end to suffering here within this very life of his. It is in this manner, friends, that a noble disciple is said to possess right view, whose view is unmistakably accurate. Someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma. The one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. In listening to these words spoken by the Venerable Sāriputta, the fellow bhikkhus became quite delighted, as they exclaimed, Sadhu, friend, and we go so sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. As we stop here for today, we'll continue from the section entitled Aging and Death, and we see how Venerable Sāriputta, as always, beautifully delineates the role of Sammā Diṭṭhi in the proper understanding of aging and death, which is everyone's path. We are guaranteed at least one of them, death part. It's good to have a guarantee, you know, at least that. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions, comments. I hope you're enjoying Sutta. Okay, so please be mindful that as I gave the example of some students of the Dhamma or people who practice one form or another, whether it is Dhamma or adhamma, it's a different story, but what is important to always consider really the truth valuable truth to consider is that the person might go on living a life and not even come close to tasting true Dhamma. But for all intents and purposes, those gathered around them might tell them, cherry picking the Dhamma, giving them this and that to fit in, almost like a toxic relationship, toxic spouse, toxic husband, or toxic friend, toxic wife, who says certain things strategically in a way to keep you on the hook. And it's crucial for us to look at the role of right view, Sammā Diṭṭhi. There was a reason why Lord Buddha established that as the very first. You get that correct, the Sammā Diṭṭhi portion correct of the Noble Eightfold Path, you are set for success. And we're seeing here, it's not just having one particular view. No, it's reflective on several different of the principle of frameworks found within the Dhamma. You cannot choose the wrong action if you have the right view. Why? Because right view is like the eyes. If you have eyes, it's like almost the headlights of a car at night. If you have eyes, you will know where you're going. But if you switch off the headlights of the car, you don't know where you're going at night. And there are no lights, unfortunately, around you, street lights. You will slam, you're going to actually fall down a cliff. And that falling down, we can resemble that to living life without Dhamma. Even though you might be living a whole entire life thinking that you're practicing. And that is an unfortunate reality we see all around us. Not one particular group, but throughout the Buddhist world we see this. I'm not even going to talk about other traditions, other religions. So, it's important for us to bear that in mind, and the role of Sammā Diṭṭhi in all of these different aspects of our lives. Ultimately, it is all about our practice and our understanding and learning through our interactions with life, consciously, by slowing things down and not rushing. So, if there are no questions, let us conclude by transferring some merits. Akasatha chabumata devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumuditva chirang rakhantu lokasasana. Akasatha chabumata devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumuditva chirang rakhantu desana. Akasatha chabumata devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumuditva chirang rakhantu mampati. May you all be well. May the blessings of the Triple Gem, the Dhamma, of course the Buddha, and the purity of the Sangha, the energy left behind by the Arahants, still strong as the energy left behind, the signature of Lord Buddha's energy is strong. That's why the Dhamma still vibrates with the help of the Devas, many of whom sat at the feet of, or touched the ground with their divine feet in front of Lord Buddha, listened to, heard discourse after discourse, who know the discourses by heart, many of the Devas, with their protection also. May you feel yourself strong. May your practice strengthen and find more and more strength every single day, more drive to complete the task in this life Titeva Dhamme. Be fearless. This is a warrior's path. This is the head of this path. Lord Buddha was known as the unvanquishable conqueror. And the Dhamma he taught is the same. So we have nothing to fear. Slow things down. Be fearless. And go all the way. Stop selling yourself short. And the Dhamma is there to guide you. Sukhi hotu, and until next time, be well.